Thank you, gentlemen. Well, we've been in the story of Ruth for a few weeks, and it has many parts. In a series of setbacks, it kind of reminds me of climbing a mountain with switchbacks. You wonder where the road is heading, and instead of arriving at your destination, you hit yet another curve, another bend in the road, another switchback that goes in a new direction. You know, life is never a straight shot from one blessing to another, and then you get to heaven. It doesn't quite work that way, does it? So in chapter 1, as we review, Naomi and her sons were forced to leave their homeland because of a famine, and Naomi's husband dies. Her sons marry Moabite women. After 10 years, Ruth and Orpah are unable to have children. And then their husbands also die. But one day the famine is over and the crops are growing in Bethlehem once again. And so Naomi returns home. The devoted Ruth, her daughter-in-law, clings to Naomi with love and support and commitment, even giving her life to the God of Israel, forsaking her old life. But Naomi is blinded by the anger and bitterness of the situation. She cannot see the sovereign hand of God in her return, even with Ruth by her side. In chapter 2, Naomi is finally filled with God's sovereign hope when God brings Boaz into their life. Sovereign hope means that God is in control. It means that he is above all things, and he lovingly reigns with his people, and he providentially cares for his children. God just didn't create us to just stand back and let us flounder on our own. He sustains us. He is with us if we would but pay attention to God's moves in our lives. So Naomi is filled with this new hope because the once angry and bitter Naomi finally recognizes that God is behind the scenes in bringing Boaz into their lives. And so filled with hope, Naomi believes that God is bringing Boaz and Ruth together. Boaz, as it turns out, not only is a godly man, but he happens to be the relative of her late husband, Elimelech, and a very critical piece in this story. And so sensing the rightness of Naomi's plan, Ruth boldly approaches Boaz at the threshing floor one evening. Ruth came in newly bathed, perfumed, in her normal clothes, and it was a way to let Boaz know that her time of mourning over her dead husband, has come to an end, and she was prepared to be the wife of Boaz. If Boaz was willing to spread his wings over her. But for Ruth, it was more than getting married that motivated her to see Boaz that night. Boaz happens to be the kinsman redeemer, the guardian redeemer, a male relative of Naomi's late husband, and he could legally redeem her husband's property and therefore redeem the whole family name. I mean, Ruth could have married anyone else. She could have married any young man that was in Bethlehem, but she chose Boaz not only because he was an upright man, but by marrying Boaz as a legal redeemer, she was also taking care of Naomi. So this wasn't just about herself. This was for her family, for her mother-in-law, Naomi. But we have a problem. We have a big problem. Ruth's righteous risk hits a snag. It hits a setback. So on the threshing floor, if you remember, Boaz blesses Ruth, and he affirms her kindness and her integrity, not running after younger men. She has gained a wonderful reputation in Bethlehem as a woman of God. He tells her not to be afraid, that he will do all that he asks of him. In fact, he acknowledges that, yes, I am a legal redeemer. But then he says this to her: although it is true that I am a guardian redeemer of our family, there is another one who is more closely related than me. You go, what? After all this, coming down to the threshing floor, and there's another redeemer in the family? Some guy stands in the way? Ruth boldly came to Boaz only to discover that she might not even get the man that she cares for and that she loves. Even though Boaz qualified to be the family redeemer, he was honest to acknowledge there was another person who was also a legal redeemer ahead of him. And he could redeem Naomi's property ahead of him. You know, we can't imagine the feelings that Ruth must have been feeling about that time. This is yet another setback. She has no idea who the other man is. It's just another man, right? He's just a legal man that could marry her. Here is one of those moments where you believe that God is moving and you sense God's sovereign control, but suddenly you're not sure what to think or feel. I don't think she saw this coming. Is it all just going to fall apart? Fear, doubt, confusion can enter the heart when we have setbacks. Now, what about Boaz? In fact, he faces the same kind of setback as Ruth. But we need to remember something. Boaz doesn't have to marry Ruth. He doesn't have to be the redeemer. In fact, on the surface of it all, it's actually a bad investment. Ruth was a poor, foreign widow at the bottom of the social heap. The act of redeeming Naomi's husband's land is complicated, and it's going to cost you money. This could be an enormous sacrifice on his part. But in spite of the setback and the obstacle of this other dude, Boaz continues to choose Ruth and Naomi. Now, we must come up with a way to redeem Ruth and Naomi legally and with integrity. But here's the problem. What if this other guy decides to exercise his legal rights and redeem the land? Suddenly, what looked like God's sovereign plan for Naomi and Ruth and Boaz has become very, very complicated. So do you remember making plans? Really good plans? Really slick plans, and it's all coming together, and then suddenly your goal is blocked. We've all been there before, right? Things we make, plans we make, and then suddenly the door slams shut. It looks so clean and straight, and then someone had to go and mess it up, right? A few years ago, there's a story told about runners in Pennsylvania, and they were trying to qualify for the famed Boston Marathon. And so to qualify, you have to run a certain speed, right, for a marathon. And so they're running a course, and it had train tracks running through the 7th mile. And when the trains crossed this marathon course, the train crossed very, very slowly, right? You know those freight trains that just kind of chug along very slowly, right? And so the race officials communicated with the railroad, and the railroad folks promised, oh, no problem, that there will be no trains on the tracks that day. Absolute assurances, nothing will happen, the trains will be suspended for the race. Yet when the race came, the assurances didn't stop the train from coming. And sure enough, at the 7th mile, when the runners were getting there, the train chugs along. And a whole whack of them did not qualify because of this slow train. You had hopes, right? You had dreams, and suddenly this slow train comes along and blocks your goals, and then you're no longer qualified for the marathon or for something. So there's a great lesson in this story and what happened to these marathoners. The Christian journey is never a straight shot into heaven. Proverbs 16:9 reminds us, in their hearts humans make their plans, but the Lord establishes your steps. The last part we have to understand. We have to figure that out. There are going to be obstacles. There's going to be setbacks. There's going to be crooked roads. There's going to be dangerous curves. There's going to be switchbacks, up and down the mountain of life. And when we face obstacles and setbacks to what we think is God's will for us, sometimes we are tempted to take things up in our own hands. We worry, we complain, we get bitter, we take our focus off of God, and we make bad decisions, selfish decisions, impatient decisions. Sometimes we wonder why God allows us to go through these setbacks, but it's a reminder that following Jesus is never a straight line to fulfillment. And this is precisely what Boaz and Ruth faced. So let's discover how Boaz, how he responds. Boaz chose a route of integrity and trust. So he continues in his conversation with Ruth that night. He says, stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to do his duty as your guardian redeemer, good, let him redeem you. Can you believe he said that? But he does. But if he is not willing, he continues, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until morning. Now, I'm not sure if Ruth's fears subsided in that moment. My guess is she probably didn't sleep very well that night. I don't think she wanted any other man but Boaz. What do you think? I don't think we have to think very hard. We know what she wanted. All she remembers is following her mother-in-law's advice when she says, he will tell you what to do. And he did, didn't he? Boaz acted with integrity, and he chose to honor the legal system of the town. He would not try to cheat the system. If this other guy was willing to redeem Ruth, good, he says, let him do it. But Boaz also says, as the Lord wills. There it is, right? He's thinking about something beyond and greater than themselves. As the Lord wills, I will redeem you. If we are living our life with God, it is his will that matters, even in these setbacks. His will is always the best. The Lord's will is what guided Boaz and what should guide us. But God's will always follows the path of integrity before God and man. So, early the next morning, Ruth left the threshing floor before sunrise. Boaz didn't want anyone to see that a woman came to the threshing floor that evening and somehow misunderstood what took place. But before he left, he was there to care for Ruth, and he gave her 6 measures of barley into the garment that she brought, that she was wearing. She goes home. Ruth tells Naomi that Boaz didn't want her to return to Naomi empty-handed. His generosity and love was amazing. He's not just thinking about himself, he's thinking about Ruth and Naomi. When Naomi saw the heaps of barley, she said to Ruth, wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today. And so Naomi, filled with God's sovereign hope, is confident that Boaz will not rest until the complications of this redemption are resolved. Naomi seems to know that Boaz will get the job done. Once we enter chapter 4, the scene changes to the city gate, and Boaz is motivated by love and redemption. And so at the city gate in Bethlehem, Boaz sat down. And while he was sitting there, the ESV says, behold, or what you might say, by surprise, or just then, another redeemer whom Boaz spoke about to Ruth came by. Well, we already know enough to recognize that this is simply not by chance. But the narrator is again trying to tell us that behind everything is the sovereign hand of God, the providential hand of God. God was behind all these things. Boaz said to him, come over here, my friend, and sit down. And the man did as Boaz requested. Obviously, I think as a relative, Boaz would have known his name. He would have known something about who this man was. But Boaz simply calls him friend. He does not name him. Commentator Daniel Block suggests that by not naming the man, the narrator may be creating a less than favorable impression of this man. As the man waited, Boaz finds other elders to make up a council of witnesses in the city. This is way before phone service, but probably took a little bit of time to assemble all these gentlemen. But Boaz literally did not rest, and he actively sought to find these people so he could bring about a legal proceeding, right? Living by mission of integrity to become this kinsman redeemer, presumably what the town required for these types of decisions. So after successfully finding the other elders in Bethlehem, Boaz addresses the nameless redeemer. And so listen to what he says. Naomi has come back from Moab, is selling the place of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me so I will know. For no one has the right to do except you, and I am next in line. And the nameless man says, I will redeem it. Now, I don't want to dwell on this point, but Naomi was not technically selling land that belonged to her husband, as the text might suggest. According to Israelite customs, widows couldn't own land, therefore they can't sell land. While Naomi and her husband Elimelech were away in Moab for 10 years, land probably ended up in the hands of someone else other than their family. And so by returning to Bethlehem as a widow, Naomi was actually powerless to regain her husband's property. This explains why Ruth had to scourge for food when they returned to Bethlehem. What is at stake here is the right to legally acquire the land that had ended up in someone else's hands because it needs to be brought back into the Elimelech family again. And so this would restore dignity to the family name. A redeemer within the family could legally sign for it and be responsible for the land, whatever it took. This is what Boaz wants to be and do. Boaz is on a mission of love and redemption for Ruth and Naomi. But the nameless redeemer agrees to redeem the land. I will redeem it. Another setback. What they thought might happen suddenly happened. Now what does Boaz behind the courtroom after the proceedings and punches lights out? You know, that would be a sensational Hollywood ending, right? Beat up the bad guy, take your girl, and run and take the land, right? Would that be a glorious ending? But no, that's not Boaz's style. Boaz keeps his fists to his side. Without a moment's hesitation, Boaz adds a shrewd qualifier. He says this, "On the day that you buy the land from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the dead man's widow, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property." I don't think the man saw this coming. Add this little qualifier. When the nameless Redeemer heard this, he says, immediately, "Then I cannot redeem it because," listen to this, "because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it." You know, I would have loved to see the expression on this nameless man's face when he heard the name Ruth the Moabite. I really do. What's going through his mind that he would suddenly say, "I can't do it"? He was not willing to make the sacrifice to redeem the land because it involved having children with Ruth, and he may not be very keen on marrying a Moabite woman. That is probably the critical issue here. Although everyone thought well of her. But no, not for this guy. But for him, it was too risky. And so he thought not about Ruth. He thought not about Naomi. He didn't think about their well-being. What was he thinking about? Only himself. Unwilling to make the sacrifice. And so Boaz and the other man finalized the agreement, and Boaz became the legal redeemer. And as was the custom, the other man said to Boaz, "Buy it yourself," and he removed his sandal and he gave it to Boaz. And so in front of the elders as witnesses, Boaz announced, "Today you are witnesses that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Chilion, and Malon, and have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, Malon's widow, as my wife in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not appear from among his family or from his hometown. Today you are witnesses." So it was official. Ruth would become the wife of Boaz. And in that moment, she found her home. She found her place of rest. But behind it all that took place, behind the scenes, is the sovereign hand of God that brought it all together. Even though Ruth and Boaz faced setback after setback, they acted in love, in sacrifice, with integrity, and they trusted on the providential hand of God. Well, we're going to wrap all of this next Sunday with a lot of themes that all converge and come together. But for now, I just want you to think about setbacks. And the question I have for you is, how have you handled setbacks in your life? How have you done? Do you have a pattern? Because this story is written to help us believers trust in the grace of God when the clouds are thick and when we can't see the road. Switchback after switchback, setback after setback. Naomi almost came to the end of herself until she finally recognized God's care for her and for Ruth. Sometimes we manufacture our own solutions and we use the strength of the will. We use our intelligence. But you know what setbacks are there for? Setbacks are often there to humble us. God uses setbacks so that we finally trust in the sovereign grace of God. We don't think of them as gifts very often, do we? We think of them as annoyances. But sometimes God allows these setbacks so that we understand our own frailty and we learn to trust God. And so I encourage you, call out to God when the clouds are thick. Seek his face. Know that God is so completely faithful to you. Trust him. Live with integrity. I invite the worship team to come now, and as I pray. Lord, thank you for your word. And I pray that we will meditate on this story in a way to help us understand that, life is not a straight shot into heaven. And you allow these things to come into our lives to grow us and to grow stronger in our faith in you. Help us to acknowledge your faith, your faithfulness to us, and your redemption. You are on our side. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.